In this video, I want to talk about the Theandric activity of Jesus Christ, in the context of the doctrine of Christ's two wills. St. Maximus the Confessor championed the orthodox Christology of Christ's two natures and two wills, and his theology was accepted at the Council of Chalcedon. As we shall see when looking at his work, Ambiguum 7, he constantly and consistently emphasizes the centrality of the person of Jesus Christ for our approach to theology. The basic logic behind this aspect of the Chalcedonian doctrine is that since energy is proper to nature, as the Cappadocian Fathers taught, in possessing two natures, Christ likewise possessed two energies, and as with the two natures, these were united in his person without separation, mixture, or confusion. We would say that this doctrine presupposes the distinction between essence and energies in God, for the Logos enters time and space. His activities or energies manifest in the world, taking on the accidents of time and space, we might say. This is not to divide the energies from the nature and make them a separate self-subsisting reality, but to preserve the simplicity and wholeness of the nature. For example, when Christ walks on water, the activity of walking is natural to his humanity. The walking on water is natural to his divinity. Yet that activity is not merely a fragment of a singular activity, identified unqualifiedly with the divine nature, nor is it a created effect. Rather, it is really distinct from other activities of God, such as sanctifying or creating the world. This is not to say that every token act of Christ that reveals his divinity is a distinct and unique energy. We still make distinctions between the energies and their effects or manifestations, nor can we name every energy, though they are many. We should also remember that the divine attributes are energies, and thus walking on water is in one sense a manifestation of the impassibility of God and of his mastery over the elements. Hence, to speak of energies solely as activities is putting too much stress on one of the analogical terms we use to understand this concept. Another point to make is that St. Maximus talks of the natural energies of man, and specifically the natural motion of man. He talks of it in terms of pathos, being moved, and distinguishes this positive natural passivity, being moved in accordance with God's will and energy, from the blameworthy passions, which entail being moved contrary to God. It is only through the human will, moreover, that we can consent to the proper natural movement in accordance with the divine will. God cannot force us or manipulate us like puppets. That is the monergist heresy. By that token, we have the freedom to orient our will contrary to or in discordance with the will of God. This is precisely because we are rational creatures, and not consubstantial with God. Since we have come into being prior to the commencement of our natural movement, for as St. Maximus points out, there is no movement prior to existence, there is the possibility of deliberation, in accord with our nature as rational beings. Thus, St. Maximus suggests that the moment Adam was created, he fell of his own free will, because it was from the beginning of his existence that he began to exercise his will, the rudder, as it were, steering his motions. The aim is that what God is to the soul might become to the body, and that the Creator of all might be proven to be one, and through humanity might come to reside in all beings in a manner appropriate to each, so that the many, though separated from each other in nature, might be drawn together into a unity, as they converge around the one human nature. When this happens, God will be all things in everything, encompassing all things and making them subsist in himself. For beings will no longer possess independent motion or fail to share in God's presence, and it is with respect to this sharing that we are and are called gods, children of God, the body and members of God, and it follows, portions of God, and other such things in the progressive ascent of the divine plan to its final end. Since man was created for and to this end, but because our forefather Adam misused his freedom and turned instead to what was inferior, redirecting his desire from what was permissible to what had been forbidden. God, who does whatever is necessary for our salvation, in his wisdom and love for mankind, and with the goodness that befits him, affixed the appropriate punishment alongside the irrational movement of our intellectual faculty, where it would not fail to do what was required. And so God punished with death precisely that element within us by means of which we destroyed our power to love with our whole mind, which we owed to him alone. The aim was that, by experiencing pain, we might learn that we have fallen in love with what is not real, and so be taught to redirect our power to what really exists. Only a divine person who is without beginning is capable of instantiating human nature in its perfect state, in total accordance with the will of God. This is because there is no beginning to his person, that he should have to deliberate about his mode or direction of willing. As we have said, this being in accord is in a certain specific sense one of passive movement or pathos. Hence Jesus Christ, as fully man and fully God, shares with us the blameless passions. Yet it is not necessary for him to share these passions. Only by willingness to accept them does he allow himself to be moved, in order to sanctify these particular passions, which were to be the means of purifying the soul through asceticism. Thus he willingly feels hunger and thirst, he willingly weeps at the death of Lazarus, the divine will leading this willing, and the natural human will freely consenting. Indeed, he is even able to suffer and die precisely because, as a divine person, he freely wills to die, and in his agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Gospel reports the consent of his human will, although to die goes against the natural human inclination. He expresses this consent of the human will to his divine will, in order to demonstrate for our benefit his two natures, and how only God could will to die, for it is not proper of man's natural will alone to accept death, because death goes against nature. As St. Maximus explains in Ambiguum 7, motion which is impelled towards its proper end they call either a natural power or else a passion, that is, a motion that passes from one thing to another, having impassibility as its end, or an effective activity, having self-perfection as its end. Yet nothing that has come into being is its own proper end, insofar as it is not self-caused, for if it were, it would be uncreated, without beginning, and without motion, having no way of being moved towards something else. For that which is self-caused transcends the nature of beings, since it exists for the sake of nothing else. That which is impassible is in no way subject to the movement of the passions, for there is nothing that it desires, neither can it be moved by desire towards something else. Accordingly, no created being has yet ceased from the natural power that moves it to its proper end, neither has it found rest from the activity that impels it towards its proper end, nor harvested the fruit of this passible movement, by which I mean impassibility and immobility, for it belongs to God alone to be the end and the completion and the impassible, since he is unmoved, complete, and not subject to passion. If, then, rational creatures are created beings, then surely they are subject to motion, since they are moved from their natural beginning in being toward a voluntary end in well-being. For the end of the motion of things that are moved is to rest within eternal well-being itself, just as their beginning was being itself, which is God, who is the giver of being and the bestower of the grace of well-being. For he is the beginning and the end. For from God come both our general power of motion, for he is our beginning, and the particular way that we move toward him, for he is our end. If an intellective being is moved intellectively, that is, in a manner appropriate to itself, then it will necessarily become a knowing intellect. But if it knows, it surely loves that which it knows, and if it loves, it certainly suffers an ecstasy toward it as an object of love. If it suffers this ecstasy, it obviously urges itself onward, and if it urges itself onward, it surely intensifies and greatly accelerates its motion. And if its motion is intensified in this way, it will not cease until it is wholly present in the whole beloved, and wholly encompassed by it, willingly receiving the whole saving circumscription by its own choice, so that it might be wholly qualified by the whole circumscriber, and being wholly circumscribed, will no longer be able to wish to be known from its own qualities, but rather from those of the circumscriber, in the same way that air is thoroughly permeated by light, or iron in a forge is completely penetrated by the fire, or anything else of this sort. Moreover, this perhaps may be the subjection of which St. Paul speaks when he describes the Son subjecting to the Father, those who freely accept to be subjected to him, after which, or rather on account of which, the last enemy, death, will be destroyed. And this will take place because that which is within our power, I mean our free will, through which death made its entry among us and confirmed at our expense the power of corruption, will have surrendered voluntarily and wholly to God, and perfectly subjected itself to his rule, by eliminating any wish that might contravene his will. And this is precisely why the Saviour, exemplifying within himself our condition, says to the Father, "Yet not as I will, but as thou wilt." And this is also why St. Paul, as if he had denied himself, and was no longer conscious of his own life, said, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Let not these words disturb you, for I am not implying the destruction of our power of self-determination, but rather affirming our fixed and unchangeable natural disposition, that is, a voluntary surrender of the will, so that from the same source whence we received our being, we should also long to receive being moved, like an image that has ascended to its archetype, corresponding to it completely, in the way that an impression corresponds to its stamp, so that henceforth it has neither the inclination nor the ability to be carried elsewhere. Or to put it more clearly and accurately, it is no longer able to desire such a thing, for it will have received the divine energy, or rather it will have become God by divinization, experiencing far greater pleasure in transcending the things that exist and are perceived to be naturally its own. But anyone who is a portion of God, on account of the logos of virtue that exists in God, as was explained above, and who abandons his own origin, is irrationally swept away towards non-being, and thus is rightly said to have flowed down from above, since he did not move toward his own origin and cause, according to which, by which, and for which he came to be. Flowing down from above in this manner, he enters a condition of unstable deviations, suffering fearful disorders of soul and body, failing to reach his inerrant and unchanging end, by freely choosing to turn in the direction of what is inferior. Here the sense of flowing down can be understood literally, for though such a person had it well within his power to direct the footsteps of his soul to God, he freely chose to exchange what is better and real for what is inferior and non-existent. Based on these considerations, I think that Scripture, consistent with these same principles, says to Moses, "I know you above all, and concerning some others, the Lord knows those who are his own." To still others it says, "I know you not." In each case the voluntary decision to move either in accord with the will and logos of God, or against it, prepared each person to hear the divine voice.